Dorian Yates spent 6 years as Mr. Olympia without publicly showing being impressed by another competitor. Decades later, when asked online who would beat him at his best, Yates named one competitor, Ronnie Coleman. Today's account examines Dorian Yates' career, his training approach, and Ronnie Coleman's rise to 8 consecutive Mr. Olympia titles. Dorian Yates built his reputation through training rather than through interviews or magazine coverage. He trained in a converted warehouse basement in Birmingham, England, a facility known as the Dungeon. The gym had no mirrors on the walls and no music played during training sessions. Yates trained there using an approach centered on iron, concrete, and maximum physical effort. Yates won 6 consecutive Mr. Olympia titles between 1992 and 1997. His training method differed from the approach used by most of his competitors. Where other competitors relied on higher training volume, performing multiple sets per exercise, Yates used high-intensity training, or HIT, an approach built around fewer sets taken to failure, with each repetition performed with maximum effort and control. He was known in the sport as the Shadow, a name that reflected his pattern of disappearing from public view after competitions, without sponsorship tours or media appearances, focusing instead on training and recovery. People who worked with him during that period described his approach to competition as combative. Photographs of Yates smiling on the Olympia stage are rare, a pattern he has acknowledged himself. His focus during competition was on winning rather than on public engagement, and he became known as one of the most intimidating competitors in the sport. In 1997, an injury led to Yates' retirement from competition while he still held the Mr. Olympia title. The following year, Ronnie Coleman, a competitor from Texas who had placed no higher than 5th in 7 previous meetings against Yates, won the 1998 Mr. Olympia title. Over the following 8 years, Coleman won 8 consecutive Mr. Olympia titles, tying the all-time record for Olympia wins. Ronnie Coleman was born in Monroe and grew up in Bastrop, a small town in the same state. He was raised by his mother in a working-class household. His father was not present. Coleman earned an accounting degree from Grambling State University and worked full-time as a police officer in Arlington, Texas, training around his patrol shifts. He trained at Metroflex Gym, a facility without the amenities typically associated with professional-level training. Coleman drove to the gym after work, trained there consistently over an extended period, and went on to win 8 consecutive world championships. Yates built his career in near-total isolation, controlling every variable inside a private basement gym. Coleman built his on a police officer's salary, training in a public gym with no marketing budget, fitting elite training around a full-time job unrelated to bodybuilding. The two men followed different paths that eventually met at the same level of competition. Yates and Coleman shared the Olympia stage 7 times between 1991 and 1997. Yates won every one of those meetings, and Coleman never placed higher than 5th against him. By that record, the competition between them appeared settled, with Yates clearly the stronger competitor. Coleman then won 8 consecutive Olympia titles from 1998 to 2005, a run that remains unmatched. When asked how he felt about his record eventually being tied by the same competitor who had once finished behind him, Yates responded with respect and acceptance rather than resentment. He had already accepted his own retirement, understanding that injuries had ended his competitive career on terms outside his control. Acknowledging that Coleman matched his record was different from explaining what set Coleman apart, and for a time Yates addressed only the former. What he later stated about Coleman went beyond the trophies themselves. Yates and Coleman approached the same goal through different methods. Yates trained each repetition with a controlled tempo, using forced reps and negatives extended past the point where most people would stop. His focus was not on lifting the heaviest possible weight, but on achieving deep muscle fiber recruitment, even when that meant using lighter loads to do so. Coleman took a different approach to the same goal, training in a style closer to a powerlifter's than a typical bodybuilder's. His routine did not follow the structured periodization that modern coaches recommend. He began nearly every session with a heavy compound lift performed close to his maximum capacity, then added bodybuilding-style volume on top of that foundation, squats for legs, deadlifts and rows for back, and heavy dumbbell presses for chest. Higher repetition work followed once the primary lifting was complete. This training style was not designed for an audience. The footage of Coleman's training that circulated publicly documented his regular sessions rather than staged content, and it showed weights that redefined expectations for what a bodybuilder could lift. This training output required a correspondingly large food intake. During his off-season, Coleman has stated he consumed around 1,000 grams of carbohydrates a day, as part of a daily intake reported to reach between 5,500 and 6,000 calories, built around a high-protein foundation intended to support both muscle mass and recovery. This level of intake was maintained, in varying forms across the years he prepared for each Olympia. Coleman described his approach to the sport with a statement that has since become widely quoted in bodybuilding. Everybody wants to be a bodybuilder, but nobody wants to lift the heavy weight it actually takes to become one. According to people who trained alongside him, this statement reflected a literal description of how he trained. In the year 2000, footage showed Coleman deadlifting 800 pounds for 2 repetitions. He performed that lift roughly 5.5 weeks before that year's Mr. Olympia contest, meaning he was already in contest preparation, fatigued, and following a calorie deficit designed to reduce his body weight for competition. Most competitors during that phase of preparation focus on conserving energy rather than attempting maximum lifts. In 2003, footage emerged showing Coleman squatting 800 pounds for 2 repetitions. After racking the bar, he described the lift as light. He then moved to a leg press machine, loaded it to 2,300 pounds, and performed 8 repetitions. That squat total compares to a world record squat of around 1,000 pounds in a comparable weight class that same year, achieved under full powerlifting equipment by athletes who trained specifically for that lift while wearing suits designed to support maximum loads. Coleman's 800-pound squat took place during a bodybuilding leg session, at a body weight he was actively reducing for competition, without a singular training focus on that lift. His bench press numbers followed a similar pattern. Training footage from 2003 showed him pressing 495 pounds for 5 repetitions. Journalists who observed his training in person described him performing incline dumbbell presses with 200-pound dumbbells for multiple repetitions, a weight most lifters have not used. Coleman has stated that he once benched 225 pounds for 72 consecutive repetitions, though that figure has not been independently verified in the way his maximum lifts were. Coleman trained in a manner closer to a competitive powerlifter pursuing record lifts than to a bodybuilder pursuing a trophy, while pursuing both goals at the same time without a decline in either area. Coleman's lift numbers can be placed in context against dedicated powerlifters. Strength athlete Stan Efferding later pulled 837 pounds raw in an official powerlifting meet, surpassing Coleman's deadlift, and recorded an 845-pound competition squat that also exceeded Coleman's mark. Other lifters have reached similar numbers since, including Johnny Jackson's 826-pound squat and a 910-pound deadlift from IFBB competitor Joe Mackey. These athletes train specifically to maximize those 3 lifts, without other physical demands competing for their recovery. Coleman recorded numbers within range of these specialists while also building and preparing the physique that judges evaluated in competition, a comparison that Yates recognized. On a podcast appearance bringing together several Olympia-era competitors, including Dennis James, Milo Sarcev, Chris Cormier, and Dexter Jackson, the group compared Coleman and Yates in detail, evaluating arms, legs, chest, and back. Most of the group favored Coleman in this comparison, though Cormier defended specific aspects of Yates' conditioning. This discussion reflects how bodybuilding insiders who trained alongside both men have addressed the comparison between them. For years, when asked about Coleman's dominance, Yates pointed to factors such as his size, his conditioning, and his ability to achieve that level of muscular definition at his body weight. In a separate conversation, Yates stated that Coleman's physique set a benchmark for size and definition that has not been matched since in the sport. Yates also addressed what he identified as a difference between his own approach and Coleman's. He described his experience competing as adversarial, noting that photographs of him smiling during his Olympia years are rare, a pattern he has acknowledged himself. His approach to competition involved treating it as a contest against both his competitors and himself. Coleman, according to Yates, maintained a different demeanor throughout training and competition preparation, smiling through the same demanding conditions that led Yates to present a more closed, reserved manner. Yates has stated that Coleman made time for fans at expos and after competitions, in situations where other athletes had already left. Yates indicated that this attitude may have contributed to Coleman's ability to continue training through workouts and injuries over an extended period. In January 2026, Yates answered a round of fan questions addressing hypothetical matchups between bodybuilders from different eras of the sport. When asked about Coleman, Yates stated directly that Coleman was the one competitor he would concede to, without offering the kind of diplomatic answer champions typically give when comparing themselves to a rival. He indicated that his competitive instincts made the statement difficult, but he said it regardless. Among every major competitor across the sport's history, Ronnie Coleman was the one name Yates placed above his own prime physique. Yates extended the same comparison to Arnold Schwarzenegger, one of the sport's most well-known competitors. He acknowledged that Arnold's genetics were exceptional relative to his era, but noted that Coleman competed roughly 40 years later, benefiting from decades of additional knowledge in training, nutrition, and recovery that had not existed during Arnold's competitive years. Based on that context, Yates stated that Coleman would win that hypothetical matchup by a significant margin. Yates has generally been reserved with praise throughout his career, known for his intensity as a competitor, and for describing his championship years as an ongoing contest against both his rivals and himself, a period during which photographs of him smiling are rare. His statement placing Coleman above his own physique represents a departure from that pattern. Coleman has dealt with a series of spinal and hip surgeries since his retirement in 2007, related to the physical toll of 2 decades of heavy training. When it has been suggested that heavy lifting caused this damage, Coleman has stated that he does not attribute the injuries directly to the lifting itself, but rather to the cumulative wear from his training over the years. He has continued sharing footage from his competitive years on social media, including a montage of training clips captioned to note that it still felt recent that he was lifting 800 pounds in the squat at Metroflex. This pattern is consistent with the training footage that circulated years earlier, including the 800-pound squats, the 800-pound deadlifts performed weeks before competition, and the 2,300-pound leg press. These are figures that would define a career for professional powerlifters, achieved while Coleman was simultaneously preparing for competition under bodybuilding's judging standards. Yates, who observed these lifts directly and understood the demands of moving that weight while maintaining that level of conditioning, later stated publicly what that footage had demonstrated for years. Yates competed with a reserved, closed-off approach throughout his career, while Coleman maintained a different demeanor through the same demands of training and competition. The account concludes with Yates previously known for withholding this kind of assessment, placing Coleman above his own competitive record.